Okay, hi sweeties, this is day 3 and we're going to talk about parallel lines and the transversal. This is not a new lesson, this is a review lesson. Remember, we have the benchmark coming up on December 20th, so please make sure you are reviewing and working through these videos and getting help from someone at home. And also, you can come to tutoring on Wednesdays for additional help also. So the standard we're really going to get into here is the information about transversals and the different type of angles that are formed when you have a transversal crossing parallel lines. What you're going to learn is what a transversal is, what are the angles formed when a transversal cuts parallel lines. Let me go with key vocabulary with parallel lines first. Parallel lines are lines that do not cross each other. And a transversal is a line that cuts across parallel lines. And I'm going to draw a transversal here. Angles 1 and angles 2 are called linear pairs because a line has 180 degrees. So when this transversal crosses the black line, then you have 180 degrees. So this is 1 degree, this is another degree, you add them together, you have 180 degrees. 3 and 4 are also called linear pairs, so as 1 and 2, 2 and 4. 5 and 6 are called linear pairs, and 7 and 8 are called linear pairs. 5 and 7 are linear pairs, 6 and 8 are linear pairs. And again, linear pairs means when two angles add together to give you 180. Alright, supplementary angles are also angles that add to give you 180 degrees. This red line right here is a transversal, and I'll go over alternate interior angles, vertical angles, corresponding angles, and alternate exterior angles on the next one. On the next slide. Okay. So let's go ahead and do this one together. It says name the angles. Line AB that's parallel to line CD, and EF is a transversal. So I have AB and CE, which are lines, or they're line segments in this case, and EF is the transversal. So I have all these angles and I want to label these angles. So I'm going to say the measure of angle 1 is congruent to the measure of angle 4. And they are called vertical angles, and I'm going to write VA for short, so I don't have to write the whole thing. They're vertical angles. Measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 equals 180. Those are called supplementary angles or linear pairs, so I'm going to call that SA. Supplementary angles are their linear pairs. Supplementary angle means two angles add together to give you 180. So it's the same for measure of angle 1 and 3 and the measure of angles 2 and 4, and it's so the same thing for measure of angles 3 and 4. They're all supplementary. The measure of angle 1 is also congruent to the measure of angle 5. And they are called 1 and 5 are called corresponding angles. If you look at 1, it's on the top of the parallel line, and if you look at 5, it's on the top of the line at the bottom. So those are called corresponding angles, and I'm going to write CA for that one. The measure of angle 1 is also congruent to the measure of angle 8. Because those are called alternate exterior angles. 1 is on the outside of the top of line AB, and 8 is on the opposite side and it's on the outside of line CD. So those are called alternate exterior angles, and I'm going to write AE for short. I'm going to go ahead and go to angles 2. So the measure of angle 2 is congruent to the measure of angle 3, and that's called alternate in that's called a vertical angle. In just a second, let me erase. That's called a vertical angle. Those are vertical angles, and the measure of angle 2 is congruent to the measure of angle 6, and those are called corresponding angles. And the measure of angle 2 is congruent to the measure of angle 6. To the measure of angle 7, and those are called alternate exterior angles. I call that AE. Now I'm going to move on to the measure of angle 3. Oh, you can also write 2. I wrote 1 and 2 in the first one. You can go ahead and say the measure of angle 2 plus the measure of angle 4 is equal to 180, and those are called supplementary angles, or they're linear pairs. Alright, I'm going to go on to angle 3. So the measure of angle 3 is congruent to the measure of angle 6. If you look at 3 and 6, they're in the middle of the parallel lines, and they're on opposite sides of the transversal. And so those are called alternate interior angles. Also, the measure of angle 3 is congruent to the measure of angle 7. Those are called corresponding angles. If you see, 3 is at the bottom of the top line and 7 is at the bottom of the bottom line. So these two angle measurements are the same. Please pay close attention to 3 and 5. So the measure of angle 3 plus the measure of angle 5 is equal to 180 degrees. These are called, these angles are supplementary angles because angles on the same side of the transverse are supplementary. That's one of those special rules that you need to know and remember, that angles on the same side of the transversal are supplementary. So 3 and 5, if you add them together, you get 180. 1 and 3, if you add them together, you get 180. 5 and 7, if you add those together, you get 180 also. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go to the measure of angle 4. So I've already said in the beginning that the measure of angle 4 is congruent to the measure of angle 1 because they are vertical angles. You have that in the top, so I'm not going to rewrite that. We did 1 and 4 in the beginning already right here. So now I'm going to say the measure of angle 4 is congruent to the measure of angle 5, and those are called alternate interior angles. So I'm going to write AI. They're in the middle of the two parallel lines, and they are opposite sides of each other on the transversal. The measure of angle 4 is congruent to the measure of angle 8, and those are called corresponding angles. So I'm going to write CA for short. So you see how this is at the bottom of the top line and this is at the bottom of the second line. So these two angles, they're in a corresponding position, so they are going to be the same. The measure of angle 4 plus the measure of angle 6 is going to equal 180. Those are called supplementary angle. SA for supplementary angle. And these angles are on the same side of the transversals, just like 6 plus 8 are on the same side, they equal 180, and 2 plus 4 is on the same side, they equal 180 also. And these up here are also called linear pairs, 2 and 4 and 6 and 8. I've involved all of the angles based off of the top angles, and if you go through, you've already know what 5 is congruent to 6, 7, and 8. All right, make sure you learn these rules. And now we're going to apply what we know by the rules in the next one. So you go ahead and create your own picture, recreate these so that you can start memorizing those. Let's try this problem together. It says line segment AB is parallel. This is the symbol for parallel to line segment CD, and line segment EF is a transversal. Write the angle measurements for the angles and name the angles. I'm not going to go through and name all the angles because I did on the previous page, but I'll go through and get the measurements for the angles. So right here, 75 is, and measure of angle 3 are going to be 75. So I can say the measure of angle 3 is equal to 75 because that is a vertical angle. And now if I go through here, the measure of angle 2 is going to be, so the measure of angle 2 is going to be 180 minus 75, which is, if you grab your calculator, you do 180 minus 75, double check yourself, that's 105, so you get 105. And the reason I can say that is because that's a supplementary angle. 75 plus 180 should be supplementary angles. I can say the measure of angle 4 is going to be 105, and by the reasoning there is vertical angles. Or you can go ahead and say 4 plus 3 should be supplementary. Now I can say the measure of angle 5 is equal to the 75 because of alternate interior angles. If this is 75, then on the other side, this is going to be 75. They're alternate interior angles. Or what you can say, you can do 4 plus 5 is should be 180 because those are on the same side of the transversal. I'm going to go with the measure of angle 1 now. The measure of angle 1 is going to equal to 105, and I'm going to say because of alternate interior angles, it's the same as measure of angle 4, or you can say 1 plus 3 should be supplementary, and you can go ahead and subtract and find what you need from there. The measure of angle 6, is going to be 105. Well, it should be 105, so I'm going to say 180 minus 75 equals 105, and I'm going to call that one a supplementary angle because if I add 5 and measure of angle 5 and 6 together, that should be 180, or you could have went with 6 is equal to 1, the vertical angle rule. Whichever way you want to approach that is perfectly fine. Okay, and then I'm going to say the measure of angle 7 is equal to 180 minus 105, which is equal to 75, and I'm going to say by supplementary angles, or you can say linear pairs, same thing there. And then here you can put 75. So you can go with vertical angle between 5 and 7, or you can do supplementary angles with the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 7. Alright, so what I want you guys to do is to go ahead, complete the rest of these problems on your papers, and then let me go over this one with you. Alright, so it's the same rules. It wants you to find the other angles and label. I'm only going to do, I'm going to go ahead and label all of these angles. So here I'm just going to start with the 45 that I'm given. So if this is 45, then the measure of 3 is also 45. If I get the measure of angle 4, so if I do the measure of angle 4, I can do, since I know that's supplementary to this angle or this angle, you can do 180 minus 45. You can grab your calculator, do the math with that. So you can put in 180 minus 45. which equals 135. So here, this is 135. So this angle here is also going to be 135. Because that is vertical angles, or you can say this one, the measure of this angle here, and this 45 should be supplementary, or you can go with this 45 and find that 135. Well, here we know that 4 and 5 should be the same, so this is 135 because they're alternate interior angles. And on this side, 45 and the measure of angle 2 should be the same. And now, in order to find this angle, well, I know this whole thing should equal 45. So I'm going to say, to get that, 5x minus 3 should equal 45. So I'm going to do some algebra here. Plus 3 plus 3. 5x equals 48. Divide by 5. Divide by 5. So x should equal 48 divided by 5. So let's graph the calculator. And this is x is 9.6. So I know this angle and I know the measure of x. And the measure of angle 6 here should be 135 by reasoning of vertical angles, or you can say linear pairs. Or you can say corresponding angle to 4 and 6. So there's all types of reasonings you can prove or say why these angles are congruent. Alright, so your job is to finish the rest of these problems, and they're all on your sheet. And I will see you tomorrow.